There go, two words spoken soft, almost gentle. The last man in that room anyone thought would say them. Just the four strangers who had just shoved a 68-year-old man to his own bareroom floor turned around, laughing, and looked at the quiet bartender who'd set his glass down without a sound. How gray in his beard, they saw a dish towel over his shoulder, an easy target. What they did not see, what nobody in that town had seen in 7 long years, was who Logan Carter used to be before he chose silence. Before we go any further, do me a favor. If you love a story where the quiet man is the most dangerous one in the room, subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. This one earns it. Leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from right now. And I read every single one, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Right. Let's begin. The Silver Ridge Roadhouse had a sound to it in the early afternoon. Carter and Logan Carter knew that sound the way a man knows his own heartbeat. Percolator ticking. The old cooler humming behind the bar. The door slapping soft against its frame when the wind came down off the mountains. There's boots dragging across the floorboards near the register. Some slow shuffle every day because Walter Bennett had spent 40 years standing on those boards, and his knees had finally started sending him the bill. Logan liked that sound. He had chosen that sound on purpose years ago, the way another man might choose a house or a wife or a religion. Wiping that same spot again, Walter said, from behind the register. Logan didn't look up. It's a good spot. You've been on it 2 minutes. Then it's real clean now. Walter grunted, the closest that old man came to a laugh most days. He shuffled over, planted both hands on the bar, and studied Logan the way he studied the weather, like it was going to do something he didn't like and he wanted to be ready. Up here again, Walter said. It wasn't a question. Chair's comfortable. That chair is 40 years old, and it's tried to kill me twice. Then we understand each other, me and the chair. Walter shook his head slow. He was 68, haired, stubborn, all the way down to the marrow. He had a way of looking at a man like he could see the parts that man was trying to hide. He'd been looking at Logan like that for 7 years. Never once asked the question underneath it. That was why Logan stayed. He's low, Walter said, and shuffled away. Loretto, and that was the whole conversation. It was enough. The girl came in at 2. Megan Brooks was 25 and moved through the roadhouse like she'd been born inside it, which she practically had. Mother had waitress there before her, her grandmother before that, back when the highway still carried people instead of just the ghosts of them. A notebook she carried everywhere, wrapped in a rubber band, and she thought nobody knew what was in it. Logan knew what was in it. He'd seen the first page once by accident. Brooks's coffee and pie, breakfast all day, a drawing of a little building. There's a place she didn't have yet. Morning, Logan. It's 2 in the afternoon. It's morning somewhere. She dropped her bag behind the counter and tied her apron in one motion. Like you slept in a chair. The chair. Everybody's got jokes today. It's not a joke if it's true. That's just an observation. She grabbed the coffee pot out of his hand before he could stop her and started filling the 2 regulars down the end. Want me to take the Hendersons? Bill's been asking for you, but I think it's because you let him run a tab. Bill's good for it. Bill has been good for it since 1994. Logan almost smiled. Before it got all the way to his face. Most things. That was the thing about Logan Carter that folks in that town got wrong. It was calm. They said it about him at the feed store, in the gas station, and the church he never went to. Oh, he's the calm one. Like calm was a thing you were born with. Like it wasn't something a man built with his own 2 hands by board over years, because the alternative was a thing he never wanted to be again. It wasn't the absence of the storm. Logan knew that better than anybody breathing. It was the wall you put up so the storm stayed on the other side of it. A little after 4, when the black trucks pulled in, he hadn't heard them before he saw them. 2 engines, big ones, unclean for that highway, idling too long in the lot before the doors opened. Us folks pulled in and shut off. These didn't. These sat there, letting the town know they'd arrived. Something old moved in the back of Logan's chest. He'd spent 7 years teaching himself to ignore. Got company, he said quiet. To Walter. Looked up from his ledger. We're open, ain't we? Sure. Logan set down the towel. Open. 4 men came through the door. They came in the way men come in when they want you to watch them do it slow. There's spread out, taking up room. 3 of them were built like the kind of trouble that lifts weights and admires itself in the mirror. A 4th walked out front, and he was different. Then clocked that difference in the first half second. Because clocking that difference had once been his entire life. That man was young, early 30s maybe. Dark suit that cost more than Walter cleared in a month. That caught the light. He had the smooth, unhurried confidence of a man who had never once in his life been told no and meant it. Lit the whole room like he already owned it. Afternoon, folks, the young man said. Beautiful place. Really, they don't make them like this anymore. But nobody answered. To the bar, ran a finger along it, testing the wood, testing the room, testing all of them. Then he looked at Walter, and his smile got a little warmer, which somehow made it worse. It'd be the owner, he said. Walter, right? Walter Bennett. Walter set down his pen. That's me, Damien Cross. He put out his hand, looked at it. Damien let it hang there a second, then a second longer, then pulled it back like he'd expected that, and it didn't cost him a thing. Represent an organization that's investing in this part of the state, Montana. Places like this, good, honest places that deserve a little protection in a changing world. We don't need protecting, Walter said. Everybody needs a little protecting. Mr. Bennett Damien pulled out a stool. Didn't sit, just rested a hand on it, like he was deciding whether the roadhouse was worth sitting down in. Times are hard out here. Fires, break-ins. You'd be amazed how quick a place like this can just burn down. Terrible thing. Insurance never covers what it's really worth. You know that sentiment doesn't have a line item. Logan stood very still behind the bar. He knew this speech. He'd heard versions of it his whole life from the other side. He knew the shape of the threat inside the politeness, the way you know a snake by the way the grass moves. So knew, right then, exactly how the next 10 minutes were going to try to go. And he knew he was going to have to decide something he'd promised himself he'd never decide again. Let me be straight with you, as I respect you, Aaron said, and he was still smiling. Oh, and that was the tell. It's a monthly arrangement. Oh, fair. And a percentage apiece, so we're partners. We're invested together. So when I say I'll protect this place, I mean it because it's mine too. It's not yours, Walter said. It's gonna be yours. Everything's negotiable. Not this. The room had gone dead quiet. The Hendersons down the end weren't drinking their coffee anymore. Megan had frozen with the pot half raised, and Logan saw her eyes move to Walter, or to him, and he willed her a word, exactly where she was. Damien sighed. It was a theatrical sigh for an audience. 40 years, he said. That's what I heard. 30 years you've had this place. Your daddy before you. That's beautiful, Walter. That's the American dream. There's right there. And you know what happens to the American dream when a man gets stubborn? It ends with a for sale sign and a bank taking half. He let the oar sit there. Or it ends with a fire, Walter said. I would never say that. Damien spread his hands. I'm a businessman. I'm offering you a business relationship. All you have to do is say yes. Get out of my bar. There it was. Their words. And the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees that every person in that roadhouse felt it. Damien's smile didn't move. Something behind his eyes did. That's a mistake, he said softly. I want you to know I gave you the chance to make it be different. He nodded. Once to the biggest of the 3 men behind him, and the big man crossed the floor and put both hands on Walter Bennett and threw him down. Logan heard it more than he saw it. The crack of an old man's hip hitting old wood, whole clattering. Walter's short, cut-off grunt of pain, a sound Logan would hear in his sleep for a long time. That sound, an honest man's body hitting the floor of the place he'd built. And Logan didn't move. That was the thing nobody ever understood about him. The hardest thing he'd ever learned. He didn't move, not yet, because moving too soon got people hurt. Because the man who reacts is the man who loses. Because for 25 years, Ben Carter had been the calmest man in every violent room he ever stood in. Calm was not weakness. The calm was the weapon. And you did not draw it until you had counted every threat in the room and knew exactly how it ended. 3 men, one out front, the big one down by Walter, the 2 others spreading, one toward the door, off the exit, and the 2 others spreading. Of them, the wiry one with the crooked nose, grabbed Megan Brooks by the arm and yanked her back against him. The pot hit the floor and shattered, and she made a sound, a small, terrible sound, and that was the moment. Logan had counted the room. Now the room told him what it was going to cost. He set his glass down on the bar. Soft, he didn't slam it. He sat down like a man ending his shift, and the small, deliberate sound of it clink cut through everything. For a reason none of them could have named. Every one of those 4 men turned to look at him. "There go," Logan said. Damien looked at him. Really looked for the first time, and Logan watched him do the arithmetic that every man had done at first for 7 years. The gray beard, the stillness, the age, and come up with the same wrong answer. "Pops," Aaron said, and turned back around. "Adults are talking." The wiry man laughed. His grip on Megan tightened and she winced. "I'm not going to ask again," Logan said. And there was something in how he said it that made Damien turn back around a second time. Because there'd been no anger in it, no fear, no shake in the voice, no rise, just a flat, patient certainty. The face of a man reading a weather report he'd seen 100 times before. Who are afraid, they yell. Men who are bluffing, they threaten. This old bartender had done neither. He just told them plainly, the way you tell a child the stove is hot. For 1/2 second, some animal part of Damien Cross's brain, the part that had kept his ancestors alive on the savannah, whispered a warning he was far too arrogant to hear. He didn't hear it. "You know what," Damien said. "I think Grandpa here needs a lesson too." "Hiram." The big man let go of Walter, and he came around the bar for Logan. "Here is what the people in that room would tell it later for years, at the feed store and the gas station and the church Logan never went to. They would say the big man charged, and the bartender didn't step back. Toward it, into it, which no man does, which is against everything the body screams, and that alone told anybody watching who understood such things that they were looking at somebody who had spent a whole lifetime on the far side of that instinct. They would say it wasn't a fight. A fight is 2 men. This was 1 man solving a problem, and the problem happened to be shaped like a person. They would say Logan caught the big man's arm and turned and used the man's own weight, his own momentum, all 240 pounds of it, and the big man went into the end of the bar, face first, and folded onto the floor, did not get up quick. They would say it happened in about 1.5 seconds. It isn't the part they'd remember most. The part they'd remember most was the wiry man, the one holding Megan, who saw his friend go down and got scared and reached for something in his jacket. Megan felt him reach, and Logan saw him reach. Logan's voice, which had not risen the entire time, 1 word, "Don't." The wiry man froze. Because a man who has just put your 240-pound friend on the floor in 1.5 seconds, and who says "don't" to you in a voice with no heat in it at all, the man you believe. "Let her walk to me," Logan said, "and nothing else happens to you. That's the whole deal. That's a good deal. You should take it." The wiry man's hand shook. He looked at Damien. Damien's face had gone the color of the ash he'd been so eager to threaten them all with. "Here go, Trey," Damien said, quiet, and it was the first thing he'd said all afternoon that didn't sound rehearsed. The wiry man let her go. Megan crossed the floor in 3 steps, and Logan put a hand on her shoulder, gentle, moved her behind him, and then it was just Logan Carter, standing between 4 men, and everyone he decided 7 years ago he was going to protect for the rest of his quiet, boring, chosen life. "Now," Logan said, "you're going to help your friend up, and you're going to help Walter up first gently, and then you're going to walk out that door, and you're going to get in those trucks, and you're going to go tell whoever sent you that the Silver Ridge is closed for business." Business. Damien had backed up until he hit a table. whole polished manner had come off him like paint in a fire. "You don't know who I work for," he said, but his voice cracked in the middle of it. "No," Logan agreed, "but I know exactly what he is. I've met 100 of him. He's the same in every state. No, he sent 4 boys to lean on a 68-year-old man, and a girl tells me everything about how brave he really is. You have no idea what you started here, Walter." Logan didn't look away from Damien. "You hurt?" The floor, breathing hard, Walter Bennett said, "I'm fine. Get him out of my bar, Logan." And it was the way Walter said his name. Logan. Like it was still the name of the calm bartender. Like nothing had changed. Like he wasn't standing 3 feet from a man he just watched take a room apart with his hands. Old man's steadiness was the finest thing Logan had ever been given. And he would have burned the world down before he let it be taken. "Get him," Logan said. "Out." They got the big one up, 2 of them. He was bleeding from the eyebrow and couldn't put weight on one ankle. And he looked at Logan the whole way to the door with an expression Logan knew well. The raw, there's confused fear of a man discovering the ground he'd stood on his whole life had never been solid at all. Or went last. At the door, he stopped. "He's gonna come," Damien said. "Oh, Mr. Hale, you beat me fine. Congratulations. But you didn't beat him. You just introduced yourself. And nobody introduces themselves to Victor Hale and walks away." Logan said nothing. Damien went out into the dying light, and the black truck started. And this time they left fast, gravel spitting, no swagger left in them at all. The screen door slapped shut soft against its frame. The roadhouse was quiet again. Except it wasn't. Except it would never be quite the same quiet again. And every soul in that room knew it. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Bill Henderson, 71 years old, who had been coming to that bar since Nixon, set down his coffee cup with a hand that wasn't entirely steady and said, in the silence, "Logan, what in the hell?" Logan crouched down by Walter. "Can you move it? My hip's been trying to quit for a decade. This ain't gonna be what does it." But Walter's face was gray and drawn. The Rados. And when Logan and Megan got him up into a chair, he leaned on them harder than he'd have ever admitted. "Give me a whiskey. Not the well stuff. The good bottle." Earned the good bottle. Megan got the good bottle. Her hands were shaking so bad she could barely pour it. Logan took the bottle from her, gentle, poured it himself, and then he pressed the glass into Walter's hand and closed the old man's fingers around it and held them there a second until they stopped trembling. "Right," Logan said, low, "just for Walter." "Right? I've got it now." Walter drank. He looked up at Logan, and his stubborn old eyes were wet at the corners. And he said the thing that everybody in the room was thinking and nobody else had the nerve to say. 7 years, Walter said. 7 years you've been standing behind my bar. I never once asked. You know why I never asked? Walter, because I figured a man tells you when he's ready. And you weren't ready. Walter's voice was rough. "Are you ready now, son?" And Logan Carter, 52 years old, who had spent 7 years building a wall board by board so the storm would stay on the other side of it, around at the little room full of people he'd quietly loved without ever telling a single one of them Bill, and the Hendersons, and Megan with her notebook and her impossible dream, with his bad hip and his good whiskey and his refusal to ever ask. And he felt the wall come down, not all at once, but just the first board. "There's some things you should know about me," Logan said. He didn't tell them everything. That night, some of it wasn't theirs to carry. But he told them enough, told it plain, that flat, quiet voice. And the room listened like a church. "I wasn't always the bartender," Logan said. 25 years I ran with people. A club. You've heard of it. Everybody's heard of it, and everybody's got it wrong. They think it's about being mean. Being a criminal. Folks. He shook his head slow. For most of us, it was about one thing. Not about not being alone. It was about a bunch of men who didn't fit anywhere finding a place they fit. It was about the promise you made when you patched in. You protect your brothers. You protect the people who can't protect themselves. It was the whole thing. Everything else was noise. "So you were a what?" Bill said carefully. "Biker." "I was a lot of things." Logan turned the whiskey bottle in his hands, not drinking from it, There's a thing they used to call me. A nice word. It's the word you use for the man they send when talking's done and nobody wants it to go all the way to blood. My whole job, most days was to walk into a room like the one we just had and make sure it ended before it got bad. To be so obviously not worth fighting that nobody fought. They're tech people. And I was good at it. God forgive me. I was the best they had. Megan had sat down across from him. She still had a red mark on her arm where the wiry man had grabbed her, and she was rubbing it without seeming to know she was doing it. How'd you leave? Logan was quiet a while. Because being the best at stopping violence, he said finally, means you're always standing in the middle of violence. After a year, and one day, I woke up and I was 45 years old, and I had put a whole life into keeping the peace by being the most dangerous thing in the room. I was so tired. I was tired in a place sleep doesn't reach. He looked at his hands. I thought if I walked far enough away from all of it, if I found some little town at the end of some forgotten highway, and I just poured coffee and fixed chairs, I could be a different man. Quiet one. I thought I could leave the other one behind. And instead, Walter said softly, the other one just walked in your front door. Yeah. Logan set the bottle down. He did. Here is what happened inside Logan Carter over the next hour. And it is the most important thing in this whole story. More important than any punch, and it is the thing the men in the black trucks would never understand until it was far too late. He grieved. He'd built a life. 7 years of it. A quiet life. Honest life. A small good life. The only thing he had ever wanted, and the only thing he had never let himself have. And in the space of about 90 seconds that afternoon, he had to reach back and pick up the thing he'd sworn he'd set down forever. A girl was scared, and an old man was on the floor, and the man he used to be was the only one in that room who could stop it. But he didn't regret it. That was the thing. Given the same room, a girl, the same old man on the floor, he'd do it again 1,000 times over and never once flinch. But he grieved it anyway. He grieved the quiet. Because he knew the way you know weather, the way he knew everything, cold and early, and sure that the quiet was over. Damian Cross's boss was real, that the black trucks would be back. They would not send 4 men next time, and they would not underestimate him next time. And the thing he had spent 7 years walking away from had just found out exactly where he lived. Come back, Megan said. It wasn't a question. She was smart, that girl. Smart enough to be scared right. Logan said. With more. Yeah. So what do we do? And Logan Carter looked around the room one more time at all of them. Everything he'd quietly built a wall to protect. And for the first time in 7 years, let himself think about the phone number he still knew by heart and had promised himself he would never dial. I need you all to go home tonight, he said. Shut your doors. Don't say anything to anybody about what you saw here. Walter, he stopped. Walter, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you answer. Go on. There's people I used to know. I made a promise to, a long time ago, a promise that runs both ways. Make one phone call, they'll come. Not 4 of them. Start a war. To stand. Just to stand. So these men understand what standing behind me means. Logan's jaw was tight. I swore to myself I'd never make that call, because making it means I'm not the bartender anymore. It means I'm him again, and I don't. His voice caught, just slightly, the only crack in the wall all night. I don't want to be him again. The room was silent. Bennett looked at the man who'd slept in his 40-year-old chair, who'd fixed his broken stools, who'd let Bill Henderson run a tab since the Clinton administration, who'd stepped between a girl and 4 armed men without his voice ever leaving flat, and the old man's eyes filled up, and he reached across the table with his weathered hand and gripped Logan's forearm over the edge of the tattoo he'd never once asked about. Walter said, I have watched you be the gentlest man I ever knew for 7 years. Whatever you were before, I don't care. I know what you are now. And what you are now is family. He squeezed. Make the call. Outside, last light went off the mountains, and somewhere south on that forgotten highway, that cost more than the whole town was worth, a man named Victor Hale was about to be told that 4 of his people had gone to lean on a roadhouse and had come back broken, talking about an old bartender with a tattoo they recognized. Victor Hale was going to make some calls of his own. It was Logan. He stood up. He walked to the end of the bar, the old phone on the wall that nobody used anymore. He put his hand on the receiver, and he stood there a long moment with his eyes closed, saying goodbye to 7 years of quiet, saying goodbye to the bartender, making his peace with the man he was about to be again. Then Logan Carter picked up the phone, and he dialed a number he'd known by heart for 25 years. The second ring, a voice on the other end, a voice that had not heard his in 7 long years, went very still, and Logan said, "It's me. I need my brothers." The line was quiet for so long that Logan thought the man on the other end might have hung up. A voice came back, rough and older than Logan remembered, and it said only one word: Ghost. Nobody had called him that in 7 years. And closed his eyes. The name landed on him like a hand on the shoulder, and he hated how much it steadied him, hated that some part of him had been waiting to hear it. "It's me, Reyes," Logan said. "I know it's you. Ain't but one man ever called this line and said he needed his brothers." A pause. Logan heard the old man breathing, heard him doing the same math. Everyone did the math of 7 silent years. Best to be dead or gone. That was the deal. You walked, and we let you walk, and nobody was going to come drag you back. That was the whole arrangement. I know what the arrangement was. So what changed? Logan looked back over his shoulder. There was watching him from the chair, holding his good whiskey with both hands. Megan stood by the register with her arms wrapped around herself. Old Henderson hadn't left either. The old fool. He'd just moved to the end of the bar like proximity would make him useful. But he came to my town, Logan said. 4 of them. On the man I work for, put him on the floor. On a girl. He heard his own voice go flat to that place, and he let it. They work for a man named Victor Hale. They're coming back. The line was silent again. It was a different silence now. Logan knew that silence too. It was the silence of a room full of men leaning in. "That name again," Reyes said. "Victor Hale." Huh. Something shifted in the old man's voice. Something Logan didn't like. "You picked a hell of a town to hide in." "Host. What does that mean?" "It means we'll talk when we get there." A pause. Know how to make coffee?" "I make coffee for a living now." "Good. Make a lot of it." The old man's voice softened at the edges just enough. "It's good to hear you. There. I ain't gonna lie about that. We'll be there tomorrow night. Don't do anything stupid before we are." The line went dead. Logan hung the receiver back on its cradle, slow, and stood there with his hand on it. There. And for a second, he didn't turn around because he didn't want any of them to see his face while it was still doing whatever it was doing. "Sure," Walter said. Logan turned around. His face was the bartender's face again. Unreadable. "They're coming," he said. "Tomorrow night." How many Rays didn't say. Logan pop back around the bar and started, a pure habit, wiping it down. But when Reyes brings men, he doesn't bring a few. Megan pushed off the register. "And what did he mean? When you said the name Victor Hale, he said you picked a hell of a town. What did that mean?" "I don't know yet." And that was the truth, and it was the part that scared him. Because Reyes didn't rattle. Logan had watched that man stand calm in front of things that would have unmade a lesser soul. Reyes had said Hale's name like it meant something old and bad. And Logan had spent 7 years out of the loop, and there was a whole map of the world he no longer had. Brothers. That was the first thing that ate at him that night, that he'd finally gone home. After he'd walked Megan to her car and watched her taillights all the way down the highway and only turned back inside when they were gone. That he was blind now. That for 25 years he'd always known the ground under his feet, every player, every debt, every allegiance, and he'd traded all of that away for peace. Now the peace was gone, and the map was gone too. To have to fight in the dark. He didn't sleep in the chair that night. He sat up behind the bar with the lights off, and a shotgun Walter kept for varmints laid across his knees. And he watched the highway. Nothing came. But he learned something. Sitting there in the dark, and it wasn't about Hale. About himself. He'd thought, all these years, quiet man behind the bar was who he'd become. The enforcer was a coat he'd taken off. Sitting there in the dark with the shotgun and the patience and the flat, cold readiness settling back into his bones like it had never left. He understood it had never been a coat, always been his skin. He'd just spent 7 years pretending otherwise. And the pretending had been the finest thing he'd ever done. They're over now, and grieving it a second time didn't make it any less over. Sun came gray over the mountains. Logan made coffee. He waited for the day to bring whatever it was going to bring. Damian Cross's boss first, not Victor Hale himself. Call, mid-morning, to the Roadhouse line. Walter answered it, and his face changed, and he held the receiver out to Logan without a word. A new voice. Smooth, smooth the way Damian's had been smooth. Damian Smooth was a young man's imitation of power. This was the real thing. This was quiet the way Logan's own voice was quiet. Adam felt the hair on his arms lift because he was talking to someone who understood the same things he understood. My name is Victor Hale. I believe you met some of my associates yesterday. I did. They're not the sharpest tools in my shed. Be honest with you. Damian's got ambition beyond his sense. He isn't supposed to put hands on anybody. A pause. I'm willing to apologize for that. Genuinely. That's not how I do business. Logan said nothing. He knew this move too. The apology that wasn't an apology. The reasonable voice. The man positioning himself as the adult in the room so that everything he did next got to wear the costume of regret. There, Mr. Carter? I'm here. I'll be straight. Because I hear you're a man who appreciates straight. My people recognize something about you. A marking. Made some calls. And now I know a little more about who's been pouring coffee out there on Route 12 than I did yesterday morning. Hale's voice didn't change at all. And that was the frightening part. Ghost, that's the name that came back. You were somebody once. You were somebody real. I'm a bartender. Sure you are. And I'm a small businessman. A dry sound that might have been a laugh. Here's my problem, Mr. Carter, and I'm going to lay it out for you because I think you'll understand it better than most. I've spent 4 years bringing this county under one roof, quietly, patiently, the way you build something that lasts. It works because when I ask, people say yes. Every time. It works if it's every time. You understand? The moment there's one place that said no and got away with it, I don't have a county anymore. I have a list of people waiting to be brave. So this was never about the Roadhouse. It was never about the Roadhouse. You're on a dead highway, Mr. Carter. I don't want it. I want the yes. And you took my yes and you broke 3 of my men to keep it. Hale let that sit. Here's where I'm being generous, and I want you to really hear this because you won't get the offer twice. Walk away tonight. Get in whatever you drive and go find another forgotten town and pour coffee there. And I forget your name. The old man keeps his bar. We work something out. Everybody lives. But you have to be gone. Because as long as you're standing behind that bar, the no that got away with it, and I cannot allow that to exist. And there it was. Again, understood. I was in that moment. Exactly the trap he was in. And he had to give Hale credit. It was a beautiful trap. He had figured out the one thing that could actually move Logan Carter. A threat to himself, Logan didn't care about himself. Hadn't cared about himself in years. But a way out for the people he loved. Leave and Walter keeps the bar. Leave and Megan's safe. Leave and the only price is your own quiet life, which you've already lost anyway. It was the smartest thing anyone could have said to him. Logan almost believed it. You'd let Walter keep the bar, Logan said slowly. Sure. And I just have to disappear. You're good at it. 7 years nobody found you. Do it again. Logan looked at Walter, who was watching him with those stubborn, wet eyes. Only one side of this and had clearly already guessed the shape of the other. And Logan thought about it. He genuinely thought about it. Because if it was true, if walking away really did keep them safe, then it wasn't even a hard choice. He'd give up anything for that. He'd already given up everything once. But he'd spent 25 years across the table from men, exactly like Victor Hale. And he knew the one thing this smooth, reasonable voice was counting on him not to know. Like Hale, don't leave witnesses to their own weakness, Logan said. The line was quiet. No, you're not going to let Walter keep anything. The second I'm gone, you take the bar, honors, because you have to, because otherwise the town saw a man say no and win. And you already told me you can't allow that to exist. Me leaving doesn't erase the no. It just erases the only person who can protect the man who said it. Logan's voice never rose. You're offering me a way to save them. You're offering me a way to abandon them right before you finish them. And you're betting I love them enough to be that stupid. The silence on the line stretched long. You're smarter than Damien, said Hale murmured. Damien's not smart enough to know when he met somebody smarter than him. That's why you sent him and not yourself. Another silence. When Hale spoke again, the warmth was gone, all of it, stripped clean, and what was underneath was the thing Logan had known was under there the whole time. I gave you the door, Mr. Carter. I want that on the record between us. Whatever happens now, you chose it. You had the chance to keep everybody breathing, and you decided you'd rather be a hero. A pause. I've buried a lot of heroes. There's more of them under the ground in this county than anybody knows. But enjoy your last quiet night. The line went dead for the second time in 12 hours. Again hung up the phone. Well, Walter said again, it was the only word the old man seemed able to find. I offered to let you keep the bar if I disappeared, Logan said. His face went hard. You tell that son of a bitch I told him no. Oh, Walter blinked. Good. It was a lie anyway, Walter. He'd have taken it the second I was gone. Logan pulled out the stool next to the old man and sat fully, and it was maybe the first time in 7 years Walter had seen Logan Carter look tired. I want you to know he offered it, and I want you to know I thought about it. Because if it had been real, if walking away really kept you safe, I'd have been in my truck before he finished the sentence. You understand that? I'd have gone. I don't want you thinking I stayed for me. Nothing here for me anymore, Walter. There's just you people. And the old man, who had spent 40 years learning to say hard things by not saying them at all, reached over and put his hand on the back of Logan's neck the way a father does. Stood there, and neither of them said anything for a while, and nothing more needed saying. Then the door opened, and Megan came in and took one look at the two of them and said, "Okay, what happened? You both look like somebody died." And Logan almost laughed. And the day started, and there was work to do before nightfall. Them close early. He told Bill Henderson and the two other regulars, but in a voice that didn't leave room, that the roadhouse was shut for a couple of days. Hey, business. Come back Thursday. He walked the property in the afternoon light. The enforcer in him woke all the way up, cataloging the ground the way he'd once cataloged rooms, the lines of approach, ways in, the long open lot that meant nobody could come at them without being seen for a full mile. He wasn't planning a war. Reyes had been clear about that, and so had he. A man who spent his life keeping violence from happening knows you keep it from happening by being ready for it so completely that starting it looks like suicide. You keep looking at the parking lot like it insulted you, Megan said, coming out with 2 coffees, handing him one. I'm looking at how far you can see, a mile. Or maybe more. Why? Because nobody gets close to this place without us watching them do it for a full minute. That's a gift. Yet in my old life, you paid for that kind of ground with blood. Here it's just free. The middle of nowhere gave it to us for free. He sipped the coffee. She'd made it strong, the way he liked it, off guard, that she knew that. You should go home, Megan. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it. My grandmother worked in this building, Megan said. They worked in this building. That's my grandmother's rolling pin, still hanging on the wall behind the pie case. Logan, nobody's used it in 9 years and nobody's taking it down. I'm gonna go home and lock my door while a bunch of criminals come take all that? She shook her head. Whatever you people are planning, I'm here for it. Coffee. I'll load a shotgun. I don't care. I'm not leaving. Logan looked at this girl, 25 years old, 5'4", holding a coffee mug and a spine made of something he'd spent his whole life learning to respect, and he felt something in his chest he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Pride, maybe. Or the closest thing to it. Your grandmother's rolling pin. He said. Cast iron core. She said you could kill a man with it. Megan's mouth twitched. Always figured she was exaggerating. She wasn't. Let's keep it on the wall. He almost smiled again. Yes. And this time he let it get most of the way there. Right? You stay. But you do what I say when I say it. Arguing, the second things go sideways. That's the deal. They shook on it. The 52-year-old ex-enforcer and the girl with the notebook full of dreams. And if you'd told Logan a year ago that this was how his quiet life would end, he'd have told you you were out of your mind, and he'd have been wrong. Night came down slow. Walter didn't want to leave, and Logan didn't make him. The old man sat in his chair with his good whiskey and a lifetime of stubbornness and said, if they were coming for his bar, he'd be in his bar when they got there. Logan understood that too well to argue. They came at 9. It wasn't Hale's men. Logan heard the engines from a mile off, exactly like he'd said, and the sound of them lifted him off the stool and put him at the window. And then he stopped, because it wasn't the low grumble of Hale's clean black trucks. It was a different sound, a sound he hadn't heard in 7 years and knew in his marrow. Motorcycles, a lot of them, coming up the highway in the dark, a river of single headlights, and Logan stood at the window and watched them come. Something in his throat closed up tight. Logan? Megan was beside him. That's mine, Logan said. His voice was strange. My brothers. They came into the lot, one after another. More than Logan had let himself hope for, dozens of them. And they didn't gun their engines, or shout, or make any show of it. That was how you could tell they were the real thing. The real ones don't perform. They just came in orderly and parked in long, neat rows and shut down. And the silence after all those engines died was the biggest silence Logan had ever heard. The lead rider swung off his bike. He was old now, Reyes, older than Logan had braced for, his beard gone full white, his back not as straight as it had been. But he crossed that lot toward the roadhouse door with the same unhurried certainty he'd had for 40 years. And when Logan pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold, the two men stopped 3 feet apart and just looked at each other. Old ghost, Reyes said. You got older, yeah. Now, one of us was living clean. Reyes' eyes moved over him, to bottom, taking inventory the way old soldiers do. And his weathered face cracked, and he stepped in and grabbed Logan and pulled him into an embrace so hard it hurt. Stood there in the arms of the man who'd patched him in 25 years ago and felt 7 years of carefully built distance collapse in a single breath. I'm sorry, Logan said low, into the old man's shoulder, disappearing for all of it. Shut up. Reyes pulled back and gripped his face in both hands. Tough. You don't apologize for wanting to live. You hear me? To me, every one of us out here dreamed about doing exactly what you did, and none of us had the guts. Out. You got clean. Don't you ever be sorry for it. He let go. You want to tell me why you dialed a phone you swore you'd never touch again? Behind Logan, the door opened, and Walter came out onto the step, on his cane, and Megan behind him. Rhea's eyes went to them. Logan saw the old man, read them in a glance the elderly owner, the young waitress, and read the whole story off them. And something settled in Reyes' face. This them? Reyes asked. Them. Huh. Reyes looked at Walter a long moment. Then he did something Logan didn't expect. He took off his hat. He said, my name's Reyes. I've known this man near 30 years. He is the finest man I ever rode with, and I have ridden with a great many men. Whatever he became out here, whatever he is, to you now I want you to know, he was that same thing to us. He was the one who kept the rest of us human. Reyes put his hat back on. Them family. He told me that on the phone, and he don't say things he don't mean. So that makes you family to us. We don't let family stand alone. Walter Bennett, 68 years old, who had built a bar with his own 2 hands and refused to bow to a man who came to take it, at that lot full of motorcycles, and hard men come from all across the country to stand for a bartender. The old man's chin trembled, and he said, well, I suppose you'd all better come in out of the cold. He's on. Logan makes a hell of a pot, and that broke the tension of the whole terrible day, and something like a laugh went through the men, and they came in, filling the little roadhouse wall to wall. Megan started pouring, and Logan started pouring. And for one strange warm hour, the Silver Ridge was fuller and louder and more alive than it had been in 20 years. Reyes pulled Logan aside, back by the pie case to the grandmother's rolling pin, and the old man's face had gone serious again. I got to tell you the part I didn't say on the phone. Reyes said, low so only Logan could hear, about Victor Hale. Tell me, you've been out 7 years. Host. You don't know the map anymore, and the map changed. Reyes glanced around, made sure no one was close. Victor Hale ain't just some businessman muscling in on small towns. Like 4 years ago, when he started buying up this county, you know where his money came from. Who backed him? No, us. The word hit Logan like cold water. Not the club, not the brotherhood. But there was a faction, a few of the ones who went bad, the ones who forgot what the patch meant, the ones we pushed out over the years. They took money, and they took muscle, and they went into business with men like Hale. That's where his start came from, Logan. That's why my blood went cold when you said his name. Reyes's jaw was tight. The men Hale's gonna send back here, some of them are gonna be wearing colors you'll recognize. Some of them are gonna be men you rode with, men you trained. I couldn't say on the phone. He put a hand on Logan's shoulder. Oh, heavy. You didn't just make an enemy of a criminal. You made an enemy of your own ghosts. And tomorrow, you're going to have to look some of them in the eye. Logan stood very still under the rolling pin. His instinct had been to keep on the wall. Behind him, the room was warm and full of the laughter of his brothers. And in front of him, the old man he trusted more than any living soul had just told him that the war coming down that highway wasn't going to be against strangers at all. It was going to be against family that had gone wrong. And Logan Carter understood in that moment that stopping this, without it going all the way to blood, the thing he'd spent his whole life being the best in the world at, was about to be the hardest thing he had ever tried to do. He didn't sleep that night either, but this time he wasn't alone with it. Us sat up with him behind the bar, the two of them nursing coffee gone cold, all the brothers bedded down where they could in the booths, on the floor, a few of them out in the lot, leaned against their bikes with their eyes half open. The way men sleep when they've spent a lifetime not fully trusting the dark. And Logan turned the thing Reyes had told him over and over in his hands like a stone he couldn't put down. Names, Logan finally said. You said men I'd know. Yours. Give me names. Reyes was quiet a while. You sure you want them tonight? It might be easier to see the faces cold. Nothing about tomorrow's going to be easy. Give me the names. The old man sighed and named them. There's two Logan didn't know. Younger guys, patched in after his time. The third name landed, and Logan felt it land. His own face do something it hadn't done in 7 years. Cole, Logan said. Cole. Reyes watched him carefully. Cole. No, I'm sorry, Ghost. Danny Cole rides with Hale. Danny Cole runs half of Hale's muscle. Reyes's voice was gentle. That somehow made it worse. He went bad about 4 years back, right around when Hale started buying up the county. Nobody was surprised except the ones who loved him. And there wasn't many of those left, and you were gone. Logan set his coffee down because his hand had started to shake, and he didn't want the old man to see it, though of course Reyes saw everything. Because Danny Cole wasn't just a name. Danny Cole was a 19-year-old kid Logan had pulled out of a burning situation 22 years ago, a scared, stupid, half-starved runaway who'd fallen in with the wrong end of the club. Logan had seen something in him, some salvageable thing, and Logan had taken him under his wing and taught him everything, taught him how to stand in a violent room without becoming the violence. That the patch meant you protected people. The whole point, the entire point, was that you were the shield and never the sword. For 6 years, Danny Cole had been the closest thing Logan ever had to a son. Logan had left, walked away into his quiet life, left the kid behind. He went bad after I left, Logan said. It wasn't a question. It was a confession. Don't. Rhea's voice sharpened. Don't you do that? Grown men make their own choices, are not responsible for what Danny Cole became. I taught him everything he knows about how to hurt people. And then I disappeared, and the only thing I ever taught him after that was that people leave. Logan, I'm going to have to face him tomorrow. Yeah, Reyes didn't lie to him. That was the thing about Reyes. He never lied to spare you. Well, you are, and I'm going to tell you the truth, brother. Honors. Because you'd know if I didn't, he might be the one who ends this whole thing bad. Because you can outthink Hale, and you can outstand these young punks. Danny knows you. Danny fights like you. You made him. And a man you made is the one man you can't predict, because he learned to predict you first. The two old men sat with that in the dark. Logan looked out the window at the highway where Nightfall, a boy he'd raised, was going to ride up wearing the patch that used to mean everything, twisted into something that meant nothing at all. Dawn came, and the day was long and strange. Word had gotten out, the way word does in a town that small. By mid-morning, Bill Henderson was back, a gun in his truck, planted on a stool and refusing to leave. Boss, and he wasn't alone. The Hendersons came, both of them. Who ran the feed store came. A rancher from up the valley, Logan, had once helped pull a truck out of a ditch, came with two of his sons. None of them could do much against what was coming, and every one of them knew it. They came anyway and stood, and Walter looked around at his neighbors filling his bar and had to turn away toward the pie case so nobody would see his face. This is the thing you never understood about towns like this, Walter said to Reyes. Get himself back together. City folks think we're weak out here. Old, slow. Nobody around for 100 miles. He shook his head. Get backwards. Nobody around for 100 miles means we only got each other. And we know it. That's not weakness, mister. That's the strongest thing there is. Reyes looked at the old man with something close to reverence. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm starting to see that. Logan spent the afternoon doing the thing he did best, which was making sure the violence never had to happen at all. He set his brothers in the lot, their front, in plain sight, those long, orderly rows, dozens of hard men and their machines arranged, so that anyone coming up that mile-long stretch of highway would see, from a full minute out, exactly what they were riding into. It was the whole play, not a trap, a wall. A wall so obviously not worth breaking that only a fool would try. Then had spent 25 years learning that the best fight is the one the other man decides not to have. And he built that lot into a decision, and the decision he wanted Hale's men to make was to turn around and go home. Players, you really think they'll just leave? Megan asked him. She was refilling coffee for the 20th time, keeping her hands busy because busy hands don't shake as bad. The smart ones. The ones just working a paycheck, they'll see 40 of us standing in that lot, and they'll do the math, and they'll suddenly remember somewhere else they need to be. Logan checked the sightline down the highway again. Just the ones who can't leave, I'm worried about. The ones who've got something to prove. Who knows me? Danny Cole. Logan had told her. All of them, that morning, laid it out plain that some of the men coming might be his own. Might have to face a boy he'd raised, that if that happened, he needed all of them to let him handle it his way and not turn it into a bloodbath, because a bloodbath was exactly what Hale wanted. A bloodbath was how Hale won. A bunch of dead bikers in a bar lot, and the law brought down on all of them, and the town left broken and leaderless in the ashes. I care about him, Megan said. Still, after everything, I raised him. Megan. Then maybe that's your way in. She said it simply. Young people say the true things adults have talked themselves out of. You keep saying you're good at ending fights before they start. Maybe the way you end this one isn't by outfighting Danny Cole. Maybe it's by being the only person in the world who ever gave a damn whether he lived or died. Logan looked at this girl for a long moment. You're too smart to be a waitress, he said. I'm not going to be a waitress. I own a place. She pointed her chin at the notebook peeking out of her apron. Coffee and pie, breakfast all day. You're going to work there when this is over. Already decided. And Logan laughed, really laughed, out loud for the first time, in longer than he could remember. And it broke something loose in his chest. And for one clean second, the fear that had been sitting on him all day lifted. This is what I'm standing in front of the highway to protect. Possible girl and her impossible dream. And he understood, and completely, why he'd made the call, or why he'd let the wall come down. The quiet had to end. They came at dusk. Reyes saw them first. A lookout on the roof called it down, and the word went through the lot, and the men rose up off their bikes and stood inside the roadhouse. Logan moved Walter and the town folks to the back and told them to stay there no matter what they heard. And then he walked out the front door into the cold and took his place at the front of that wall of brothers, and he watched them come. It was a long line of trucks and bikes up the highway in the failing light, and Logan counted them as they came, and his stomach tightened because it was more than he'd hoped and fewer than he'd feared. 20 maybe, 25, and Reyes had been right. Some of them wore colors. Some of them wore the patch, worn wrong, worn by men who'd taken the one thing that had ever meant anything and sold it. Stopped at the edge of the lot, 100 feet out, and for a long moment, the two lines just faced each other across that 100 feet of gravel. Nobody moved, and the only sound was engines idling and the wind coming down off the mountains. The doors of the lead truck opened. Victor Hale got out, then knew it was him before anyone said it. He was older than Logan had pictured, fair-haired, expensively dressed, and he moved with the terrible, unhurried calm of a man who had never in his adult life been in a room he didn't control. He walked out to the middle of that 100 feet of no man's land and stopped, and he looked at the wall of bikers, and then he looked past all of them, and he smiled the way you smile at an old friend. Hale called out, "You brought company. I have to admit, I didn't think you had it in you anymore. Between your peers pouring coffee, I figured whatever you used to be had gone soft." He spread his hand. "I was wrong. This is much more interesting." Logan walked out to meet him, alone. Reyes made a low sound of protest, and Logan lifted one hand behind his back. "Stay," and walked out into the open until he stood 10 feet from Victor Hale in the middle of the two armies. "Come on, Hale," Logan said. "All of them. Nobody has to bleed tonight. Your men, not mine. You look at this lot, and you know how it goes if it goes. You lose people. I lose people. The law comes down on both of us, and neither of us wins anything but funerals. Not too smart for that. Just turn around." "I'd love to," Hale said. But he sounded like he meant it. "I really would, Mr. Carter. I don't enjoy this part, but I explained it to you on the phone. The no that got away with it. If I turn around now, my own people, I've got nothing left. So I can't. You've backed me into a corner where the only way out is through you." He tilted his head. "Most admirable. You've made yourself so expensive to move that moving you cost me everything." "One thing." "What's that?" "I don't have to move you." Hale's smile widened. First time Logan saw the thing underneath the smoothness, old cruel machine at the center of the man. "I just have to make one of your own do it for me." And Hale turned his head and called back over his shoulder, "Biddy, come say hello to your old man." A rider swung off a bike in the second row. "Does?" And Logan's whole body went still because he'd known this was coming, but Reyes had warned him. He'd braced for it all day, and none of the bracing did a single thing. Because bracing for a thing and living it are two different countries. Cole walked out into the open. He was 41 now. Logan did the math without meaning to the way you do with someone you loved. The scared runaway kid was gone, and in his place was a hard, capable man wearing colors he'd betrayed. He walked with the same economy Logan had taught him, the same stillness, the same way of taking up exactly the space he needed and no more, and seeing his own lessons walking around inside this stranger's body was the worst thing Logan had felt in years. "Oh, Danny," Logan said. Danny stopped. Something flickered across his face. "Don't," he said. "Don't you hate Danny me. After 7 years, you have every right to be angry. I'm not angry." But his jaw was working. "Won't get to matter enough to make me angry. You left. You knew what I was. You knew what this life does to a guy like me. You knew I needed." He stopped himself. "You left. So don't stand there and act like you got any claim on me now." "I don't have a claim on you," Logan said. "You're right. I gave that up when I walked. I'm not gonna stand here and pretend I didn't fail you. Danny, because I did. I left you behind. I told myself you were a grown man and you'd be fine, and that was a lie I told so I could sleep at night. You needed me, and I chose myself." Logan's voice was steady, but there was something raw underneath it. That's the truth. I've had all day to face it, and there it is. Danny hadn't expected that. Watched it hit him. Watched the anger have nowhere to go because Logan hadn't defended himself, had just agreed, had just laid the guilt down between them where they could both look at it. That's your play, Danny said. But his voice had lost some of its edge. You're going to guilt me, big emotional moment. Get me to put my gun down. No. Logan shook his head. I'm going to guilt you into anything. I'm going to tell you the truth and let you do whatever you want with it. Here's the truth, Danny. Everything I taught you, everything was one lesson. You remember the lesson? Danny's face had gone very still. All right, Logan said. You remember it. And Danny Cole, 1 year old, standing in a gravel lot between two armies with a boss watching who owned his paycheck and his life, at the man who had raised him, and something old and buried moved behind his eyes. And he said quietly, in the voice of a 19-year-old kid who'd been listening, that means you're the shield, never the sword. Never the sword, Logan repeated. Look where you're standing, son. Look what he's got you doing, being the sword. He's got you pointed at an old man's bar, a girl, at neighbors who never did a thing to anybody. Logan took one step closer. It's not you. I know it's not you because I built you. I didn't build that. Somebody took what I made and they twisted it and I wasn't there to stop it. And I am sorry. I am so sorry. Danny, but you're still in there. I can see you. You're still in there. The whole lot had gone silent. Their brothers behind Logan, 25 men behind Hale. And in the middle, 2 men and a lifetime between them. That's enough, Hale said. His voice had changed. The smoothness was gone, Danny. We didn't come here for a reunion. You know what you're supposed to do. And here it was, what Reyes had promised. The moment the whole thing turned on. Danny Cole's hand drifted toward the gun at his hip. Logan didn't move to stop him, didn't reach for anything. Just stood there, open, unguarded, offering the boy the one thing nobody else in Danny's whole ruined life had ever offered him: trust. Shoot me, Danny, Logan asked, soft, almost tender. After everything, go on then. But you look me in the eye when you do it. There, you owe me that much. You look at me and you pull that trigger to live the rest of your life knowing you killed the one man who ever gave a damn whether you made it. I did, Danny. I do. I left. And that was the worst thing I ever did. I never once stopped giving a damn. Not for one day. Danny's hand was on the gun. His whole body was shaking. And Victor Hale, watching, understood too late that he'd made a terrible mistake, that you cannot point a son at his father and trust the son to fire. And Hale opened his mouth to say something, to give some other order, to fix it, and Danny Cole took his hand off the gun. He took his hand off the gun, and he turned around, and he looked at Victor Hale, and he said, in a voice that carried across the whole silent lot, "What did you say to me?" Hale said. I said no. Danny's voice got stronger. Done? I've been done a long time. I just didn't have anywhere to go. He's right. This ain't what the patch means. It never was. A bunch of us who lost our way, and you pointed us at old men and little towns, and you called it business. I'll let you because I was too far gone to remember there was any other way to be. He took a breath. I remember now. I'm remembering right now. So no, I'm not going to shoot him. And I'm not going to shoot anybody in that lot. I'm being your sword. And then Danny Cole did the thing that broke the whole night wide open. Her back toward Logan's line. And he called out not to Logan, past him, to the men behind him wearing the same twisted colors, the ones who'd come up with Hale, the rest of you. You know me. You know I don't scare easy, and you know I don't say things that I don't mean. Hear me now. Every one of you took an oath once. Every one of you knew what the patch meant before you sold it. Look where you're standing. Look who you're pointed at. His voice cracked. We're supposed to be the shield. When did we be the thing people needed a shield from? Silence. And one by one, men on Hale's side began to shut off their engines. What? Then 2. Then 3 of them, then more. Our men who'd ridden up ready to do a terrible thing, killing their machines and stepping back, refusing, because Danny Cole had said out loud the thing they'd all been too ashamed to say. And shame is a heavy thing to carry, and they'd been carrying it a long time. And here at last was somebody offering to set it down. Their Hale stood in the middle of his own crumbling army and watched it come apart. And his silver-haired composure finally cracked. And underneath it was just a frightened man who'd never once been told no, and was being told no now by everyone at once. All dead, Hale said, and his voice shook. "Players, you hear me? Every one of you. You think you can just walk away? Well, I don't know where you live. Where are your families? Hale." Logan's voice cut across him, and cold, and absolutely certain, and it stopped the man mid-word. Think very carefully about how that sentence ends. Because you're standing in a lot with 60 men who just remembered who they are. And you just started to threaten their families. I've spent my whole life keeping men like these from doing what they will absolutely do to a man who threatens their families. Don't make me stop being good at it. Hale's mouth closed. Logan stepped in close to him, close enough that only Hale could hear, his voice down to almost nothing, and said the thing that would end it. "Here's what happens now," Logan murmured. "You get in your truck, drive out of this county, and you never come back, and you never send anybody back, and you leave every one of these towns exactly the way you found them. And in return, I don't do the thing I spent 25 years being famous for. The deal. That's the deal. That's the whole. And it's the best deal you're ever going to get. Right now, the only thing standing between you and 60 angry men is me. I'm the softest man in this lot by a mile." Hale looked at him. Whatever he saw in Logan Carter's calm, tired, his eyes, it was enough. Because the fight went out of him all at once, the way it goes out of a man, who finally meets something bigger than his own certainty. He had one card left, and he played it low and vicious, last cruelty of a cornered man. "You think this ends it," Hale said quietly. "Sure. Just for Logan. You think you win because you got my people to fold. I've got partners, Carter. Money that isn't mine. And when I go back and tell them I lost this county to a bartender and a bunch of has-been bikers, they're going to send 25 men next time. They're going to send people you can't talk out of it. People who don't have a patch to remind them who they used to be." He smiled. "Terrible. You didn't end this tonight. You just made it personal for men far worse than me." And Logan Carter stood in the middle of that lot, in the middle of what should have been his victory. Understood that the smooth, silver-haired man in front of him had just told him the truth, that the thing coming next wouldn't be talked down, be reasoned with, wouldn't remember any oath, and that the real fight would decide whether the Silver Ridge and everyone in it lived or died hadn't even started yet. Victor Hale got in his truck and drove out of that county, and the taillights of his black convoy shrank down the highway and disappeared. But for one full minute, nobody in that lot moved or spoke, because they all knew the same thing. Logan knew that they had won something tonight, and that winning it had bought them a fight worse than the one they'd just avoided. Reyes came up beside Logan and said low, "What did he tell you at the end there?" Before he folded, "I saw your face change." "He told me the truth," Logan said. He was still watching the empty highway, which is the one thing men like Hale save for when they've got nothing left to lose. The money behind him isn't his. That when he goes back and reports he lost, whoever he answers to is gonna send something worse. With no patch, no history, no line I can find and pull on. Professionals. Logan finally turned away from the road. "Beat Hale tonight, Reyes. We just introduced ourselves to the people who own him." Reyes was quiet a moment. "You believe him? Or was that just a scared man throwing one last punch?" "Both. That's what makes it dangerous. He was scared, and he was telling the truth. A scared man telling the truth is the most reliable witness there is." Logan rubbed his face with both hands, and for a moment the exhaustion showed all the way through. "Isn't bluffing, Reyes. I've heard 1,000 bluffs. There wasn't one. Behind them, the lot had come alive with a strange and fragile warmth. Hale's men, an hour ago stood in loose knots with Logan's brothers, and there was no fighting. There was something more complicated than that. Awkward, careful reunion of men who'd been on opposite sides of a line that had just been erased. Old grudges and older loyalties. Some of these men had ridden together once ago, before the split, before the ones who went bad went bad. And they stood in a gravel lot in the dark, trying to figure out what they were to each other. Kind of clumsy, and it was raw. And it was, Logan thought, the beginning of something that might actually mean something. Well, Danny Cole stood apart from all of it, off by his bike, alone. Logan walked over to him. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Danny wouldn't look at him. He was staring at his own hands, the way a man does when he's just done something that can't be undone and hasn't decided yet whether it saved him or damned him. You know what you did tonight, Logan said finally. I signed my own death warrant. Danny laughed, short and bitter. Hale doesn't forgive. Neither do the people over him. I turned on him in front of everybody. Yeah, I'm a dead man walking. And I just did it in a way that let me look at myself first. You're not a dead man. You don't know these people. I know exactly these people. I spent 25 years around exactly these people. Logan stepped in front of him, but made the boy look at him. And I'm telling you, Danny, you're a dead man because you're not going to be alone anymore. That's the thing that killed you all those years you were alone. Found you when you had nobody. And he made himself your nobody. A man will do anything for the only person who claims him. Logan's voice was rough. People now? You've got 60 of them standing in this lot. Not me. I'm not leaving. Again, son, I want you to hear that, and I want you to believe it. Even though I know I gave up the right to be believed. I'm not leaving again. Danny Cole looked at the man who'd raised him, and his face crumpled, 41 years old and crumpling like a boy. And he didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say. Again, reached out and pulled him in. And the man who'd almost shot him an hour ago put his face down on Logan's shoulder and shook. And Logan held him the way he should have held him 7 years ago before he left. The way you hold a son. Okay, Danny finally managed. Hi. Okay, I got something you need to know. Danny pulled back, wiped his face rough with the back of his hand, and something in his expression had changed. The reunion was over, and the soldier was back. Logan recognized that too, because he'd taught it to him. Sure. If we're doing this, if you're really not leaving, then I'm not going to be dead weight you're protecting. No things, Logan. I was inside. I know how Hale's operation works. I know where the money moves, and I know the name of the man over him. The answers to, the one he just went crying back to. Danny's jaw tightened. Actually end this? Not just survive the next attack. I can give you the way, but you're not going to like it. Tell me. His name is Marcus Vane. Reyes had drifted close enough to hear, and Logan watched the old man's face go still at the name, the same way it had gone still when Logan first said Hale's name over the phone, and Logan's stomach dropped because there was that feeling, again, the feeling of standing on ground he no longer knew, of being 7 years behind a map that had kept changing without him. I know that name, Logan said to Reyes. Everybody in the life knows that name, Reyes said quietly. Marcus Vane isn't a biker. He isn't a criminal, not the way we mean it. Well, he's clean. He's got lawyers and shell companies and a house you'd need a helicopter to see all of. There's money for people you don't say the names of out loud. And he uses guys like Hale as the muscle end of it that touches dirt so his own hands stay clean. Reyes shook his head slowly. Fight Marcus Vane, ghost. You can't. He's not a man you can put in a parking lot and stare down. He's a phone number that makes people disappear. Then how do we stop him? And Danny Cole smiled, dangerous, the smile of a man who'd spent 4 years inside a machine and hated every second of it and remembered every gear. Fight him, Danny said. You make him not want the fight. Same thing you did to Hale tonight, just bigger. You make the roadhouse cost more than it's worth. He's a businessman, Logan, the realest kind. Everything's a ledger to him. Oh, Route 12 and this whole county is a plus in his book, Cheap Towns. Scared people, easy money. But if you can flip it, if you can make this county the place where his operation bleeds instead of profits, where his name gets attached to things clean men can't afford to be attached to, then he does the math and he walks. Not because he's afraid of you, because you stop being worth it and you know how to flip it. I know where the ledger is. Danny's voice dropped. I know how the money comes through here. There's a business in the next county over legit on paper company that Vane uses to move cash. Hale runs it. I ran security on it for 2 years. I know the schedule, and I know the routes. I know when the accountant comes. He looked at Logan hard. You get the right people looking at that trucking company, the right federal people, and you don't have to fight anybody. I mean, you just make Route 12 the place where Marcus Vane's clean hands got dirty. And a man like that, the second his name is in a file, there's every string that leads back to him, including Hale, this whole county. He walks away and never looks back, because for him it was never worth this much noise. The lot was silent around them. And Logan Carter, who had spent his whole life ending fights with his hands, stood there and understood that Danny Cole, the boy he'd raised, had failed, the son who'd almost killed him, and then saved everyone instead, had just handed him a way to win this that didn't require a single punch. A way to win it, the way you win the biggest fights. The way Logan had always known deep down was the only way that lasted, with violence, but by making violence pointless. Logan said slowly. To do that, you'd have to talk to the feds, them the routes, the schedule, all of it. You'd have to walk into a federal building and put your own name on it. He watched Danny's face. Know what that makes you? In the world you came from? A rat. Danny said the word flat. Know exactly what it makes me. I'll be a rat. A traitor, and there won't be a hole deep enough to hide in if Vane's people ever find me. He met Logan's eyes. God, an hour ago, I was going to be the man who shot the guy who raised him, parking lot, for a paycheck. I already died tonight. That version of me is already dead. So if I'm going to be something now, if I'm going to be anything, I'd rather be the rat who took down Marcus Vane than the sword who kept him rich. He shrugged, and it was the bravest thing Logan had ever seen a man do. The patch means you protect people. I stopped being able to do that a long time ago. This is the only way I got left to do it. Let me do it. Logan looked at his son, and for the second time that night, and the second time in 7 years, the wall came down another board. Logan felt the tears come to his own eyes and let them. He put both hands on Danny Cole's face and said, "That's the bravest thing I ever heard a man say." His voice broke. Whatever you did before tonight, it's gone. You hear me? Gone. What you just decided to do, that's who you are. That's the man I raised. He was in there the whole time. They didn't do it that night. Build a thing like that in the dark on adrenaline. Sent most of the brothers to sleep, kept a watch rotation on the highway, and the roadhouse and the lot became, for a strange few days, just heavily guarded acre in Montana. And in those days, something happened that Logan hadn't planned for and couldn't have. Sun came in. Word had spread all the way now. People came not to fight. They were mostly old, and there was nothing to fight but to feed. The rancher's wife came with 3 coolers of food, that Logan never went to, sent over a woman named Doris, who took one look at 60 men who hadn't eaten right in days and simply took over Walter's kitchen like she'd been born in it. Henderson organized a fuel run so no bike in that lot ran dry. Old woman Logan had fixed a porch step for 2 summers back, showed up with a shoebox of cash, her savings, and tried to press it on Reyes for the cause. And Reyes, old man, had to walk out to the lot and stand by himself for a minute before he could come back in. And Logan watched it happen, and it did something to him. Because for 25 years, he'd protected people. It had always been one direction. He gave and stood and shielded and never once let anybody give back, because letting people in was how you got hurt. And Logan Carter had built his whole self around not getting hurt. This little dying town on a forgotten highway, opening up its arms and its kitchens and its shoeboxes of savings for a bunch of bikers. Most of them had crossed the street to avoid a week ago. This was the thing he'd never let himself have. Being protected, being held, being family in the direction that ran back toward him. Walter said. He'd found Logan out by the pie case, hours late, staring at the grandmother's rolling pin like it held an answer, better than usual. And that's saying something. I'm all right. You're not. You don't have to be. Walter lowered himself onto a stool with a grunt. Been watching you all these years, and these last few days especially. I figured out about you. Tell me you think you're a hard man. Walter said it gently. You think that's what you are, underneath. The enforcer. Ghost. You think the bartender was a costume and the hard man's the truth. He shook his head. Said exactly backwards, son. The hard man was the costume. It on for 25 years because the world needed you to, and it was killing you the whole time. Bartender, the man who fixes my chairs and lets Bill run a tab and remembers everybody's story that's not the costume. Again, that's you. That's who you were trying to get back to your whole life. You just didn't believe you were allowed to be him. Walter reached over and gripped his arm. Allowed. You hear me? You're allowed to be the gentle one, not weakness. That was always the truth. The other thing was just what it cost to survive till you got here. Logan couldn't speak for a while. Almost lost him, he finally said. Danny. He had his hand on the gun. There. And you know what I felt? Standing there, I felt like it'd be fair. I'd earned it. Like it'd be the whole bill coming due for leaving him. His voice was low and raw. I raised that boy, and then I walked out on him to go, be happy. I've spent this whole week finding out what my happiness cost him. That's the thing. Nobody tells you about running toward the quiet life. Always pays for it. There's always somebody you left behind holding the door, and now you're going back for him. Now I'm going back for him. Then it wasn't too late. Walter said it simply, the way he said everything true. That's the only thing that matters. Again, not what it cost. Whether you went back, and you went back. Most men don't. Most men just keep running toward their own quiet till they die. The people they left weakness, and they never once turn around. He stood, joints popping. You turn around, son. That's the whole ball game. That's the only redemption there is. They made the call 3 days later. It was Danny who made it, but it was Logan's idea how it was Reyes who knew a man, because it turned out that even in the world Logan had left behind, there were still a few who'd never gone bad, or who'd spent their own years quietly hating what men like Vane had done to the thing they all once believed in. One of those men knew a federal agent, a real one, a clean one, a woman who'd spent 6 years trying to build a case against Marcus Vane and had watched it die a dozen times because she could never get anyone on the inside to talk. Was Agent Sarah Ruiz, and when Danny Cole called her and said the words trucking company and Route 12, and I ran security for 2 years and I'll testify, Logan, listening on the line, heard a federal agent go completely silent and then heard her voice change into the voice of someone who'd just been handed the thing she'd stopped believing she'd ever get. Understand what you're offering me, Ruiz said carefully. You understand, I have to be sure you're real, that this isn't a trap. They're not gonna vanish on me the second things get hard. I understand, Danny said. I'm gonna tell you the one thing that'll make you believe me. I'm not doing this for a deal. I'm not asking for immunity. I'm not asking for witness protection. I'm not asking for a dime. No leverage, and I want no leverage. I'm doing it because I spent 4 years being the wrong thing, and I finally got one chance to be the right thing before they kill me for it. A pause. Fake that, Agent Ruiz. Trust me. If I was running a game on you, I'd be asking for something. The fact that I'm not is the whole proof. And there was a silence on the line. And then Agent Sarah Ruiz said quietly, no, you can't fake that. And Logan knew right then that it was going to work. It didn't happen fast. Nothing federal ever does. There were weeks of it, careful meetings in careful places, going over routes and dates and names. Ruiz's people slowly, patiently building the thing they'd been unable to build for 6 years. Because for 6 years, they'd had everything except one man on the inside willing to point at the ledger. They had the man. And through all those weeks, their strangest thing happened. The brothers stayed, all of them. Men had lives, jobs, families, and one by one, some had to peel off and ride home. 4 of them stayed, Reyes chief among them, stopped around the roadhouse because everyone understood that the most dangerous window was exactly this one, the weeks while the case built. It was strong enough to move when Vane still had time to make the whole problem disappear by making Danny disappear. And Vane tried. Of course he tried. He tried twice. The first time was a car that came up the highway too slow one night, and Logan, who never fully slept anymore, saw it from a mile out just like he'd always said, came awake and stood, and the car saw 60 men where it had expected to find one, Oh, and it turned around and left. And that was that. Vane testing the water. Getting it cold. The second time was worse. And it was the one that nearly broke Logan. They came for Megan, not at the roadhouse. They were smarter than that. Put her home. One evening, she'd insisted on still going home some nights. Insisted on not letting fear run her whole life. And Logan had let her because he understood the impulse better than anyone. And two men were waiting near her place when she got there. It was only because Danny Cole, who'd started following her at a distance without telling anyone, himself her silent shadow out of some private need to protect the innocent for once, instead of the opposite. It was only because Danny was there that it didn't end the way it was meant to end. Aired her out, got between her and them, the way Logan had taught him a lifetime ago, the shield and never the sword, and he took a beating doing it and gave enough back that the two men ran, and he got Megan into her car and drove her back to the roadhouse himself. They're bleeding and carried her in, her down. Then, they're safe, did he let himself slide down the wall and sit on the floor and shake. Logan came out of the back and saw Megan crying and Danny bleeding on the floor, understood in 1 second exactly what had happened, crossed the room, and dropped to his knees in front of the boy he'd raised. Remember? And he took Danny's battered face in his hands, and Danny looked up at him and said, through a split lip, trying to smile, the shield. Never the sword. I finally got it right. I finally got one right. And Logan Carter, 52 years old, the most feared enforcer the club had ever produced, a man who never lost control. The ghost knelt on the floor of a roadhouse on a forgotten highway and wept, openly holding his son's face, because the boy had gotten one right. They had become the shield. And there is no victory in all the world bigger than watching someone you failed become of your eyes, in front of your eyes, the thing you always knew they could be. Get it right. Logan said, over and over, her head pressed to Danny's. Get it right, son. You got it right. Megan, judging, wiping her own face, understood then something about these men that she'd been circling the whole time and finally saw clear. Everything hard about them, the violence they carried, readiness, this coiled, dangerous stillness, all of it was just love with nowhere safe to go. Love that had been born in men, the world had thrown away, and armored itself and learned to speak the only language the world had ever spoken to them, which was force. And that underneath every one of them, underneath Logan and Reyes and Danny and all 60 of them, was the same simple thing. A person who'd found out young that nobody was coming to save them, and had decided out of pure defiant love to become the person who came to save everyone else. She understood why they'd ridden 1,000 miles for a bartender. It wasn't loyalty, not exactly. It was that Logan Carter had spent 25 years being the person who came, all of them, and now, at last, they got to be the ones who came for him. After that night, Logan didn't let Megan go home anymore, and she didn't argue. She stayed at the roadhouse with Walter and Doris, and whichever brothers were on the watch. And the strange makeshift family of them grew closer up into that little building. Against the dark, it appears, and there was something almost sweet in it, in the middle of all the danger coffee at midnight, and Doris's cooking and Reyes teaching Bill Henderson to play a card game with rules that seemed to change whenever Bill started winning. They're presiding over all of it from his chair like a king who'd never wanted a kingdom and had somehow ended up loved by one anyway. And then 6 weeks after the night in the lot, Agent Ruiz called and said the words that ended it. She said, tomorrow morning, we've got enough insurance for the trucking company, the accounts, the whole structure. Danny, listen to me. We've got enough that Vane's name is in it. Just Hales, Vane's. His clean hands are all over that dirty money. And we can prove it now because of you. A pause. I've been chasing this man for 6 years. There's 6 years, and you handed him to me in 6 weeks. I need you to know that. Whatever you were, before you need to know what you just did. The raids happened the next morning. There was in 3 counties at once before dawn. Logan and the brothers and the whole Roadhouse family sat up all night and into the morning, not knowing. And when the call came from Ruiz just after 9 o'clock, I put it on speaker so the whole room could hear. And Agent Sarah Ruiz's voice, tired and triumphant. Roadhouse. It's done, she said. We took the trucking company. We took Hale, he was there. We took him at the site. He's not walking out of this one. And Vane, her voice caught. 6 years of it caught. Vane's lawyers already reached out this morning. He's not going to fight it in this county. He's cutting every string. He's liquidating everything that touches Route 12, everything that touches Hale, everything that could put him near any of it. Moving away from the whole operation to save himself. A breath. Remember, you did it. You made yourselves cost more than he was willing to pay. That's exactly what you set out to do, and it worked. Route 12 is clean. He's gone, and he's not coming back. Coming back is the one thing that could still sink him. The roadhouse erupted. 60 men and a dying town's worth of old folks, all packed into one small building on a forgotten highway, all of them roaring at once. Bill Henderson pumping his fist like a boy. Paris crying into her apron. Reyes throwing his white-haired head back and laughing a laugh. Logan hadn't heard in 30 years. Bennett sitting in his chair with both hands over his mouth and tears just running down that stubborn old face. And Megan grabbing Logan by both arms and shaking him and shouting, "You did it! Did it, Logan." And Logan standing in the middle of all of it. Remember this man who had spent his whole life being the calmest thing in every room and letting it wash over him, letting himself feel it, letting himself be held up by the joy of the people he'd protected. Or he was looking for one person. He found Danny in the back, alone, sitting on an overturned crate, staring at his own hands again. And Logan went to him and sat down beside him. And for a while, the two of them just listened to the celebration in the front room. Of a town saved, the sound of a thing that had ended right. Hers. "You know they're going to know it was you," Danny finally said. "Whatever's left of Vane's world, they'll figure out who talked. I'm not safe. I'm never going to be safe again." "You're going to be safe," Logan said. "Ruiz is putting you in the program. New name, new town. Where nobody knows the ghost or the man he raised. A quiet life." Danny huffed. A laugh, that's the joke, right? "I finally do the right thing, and my reward is I get to go be nobody in some town at the end of some highway. Alone. Same as you were." He looked at Logan. "How'd you stand it?" "I 7 years alone with it." And Logan looked at the boy he'd raised. Understood that this was the last thing, the real last thing this whole story had been walking toward the entire time. "I didn't stand it," Logan said. "That's the thing I finally figured out. Last few weeks. I thought the quiet life was the reward." Sure. "Danny, I thought if I got far enough away and stayed still enough, I'd be at peace. And I wasn't. I was just alone. I mistook being alone for being safe. I mistook being safe for being happy. I was wrong about all of it. The quiet didn't save me." He put his hand on Danny's shoulder. "You know what saved me? The day 4 idiots walked into that bar and I had to stop being alone to protect somebody. That's what saved me. Not the running, the turning around. So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying you're not going into that program alone." Logan's voice was rough. "I'm saying wherever they send you, there's a roadhouse there, a diner or a garage, or some little place at the end of some highway that needs a couple of quiet men who know how to fix chairs and pour coffee and keep an eye on the door. And I'm saying I already talked to Ruiz, and there's a way for me to come too. I want. He gripped the boy's shoulder hard. "Left you once, Danny. I am not doing it again. I don't care what it costs. Wherever you go, I go. You're not going to be nobody in some town alone. They're going to be my son in some town with me. That's the deal. Whole deal. And it's the best one I've got. And you're going to take it." Danny Cole put his face in his hands. And in the front room, the celebration rolled on. The sound of a town that got to keep itself, of an old man who got to keep his bar, and a girl who got to keep her dream, and 60 brothers who got to remember at once what the patch had always meant. And back in the quiet, 2 men who'd lost each other and found each other sat side by side on an overturned crate. One of them wept, and the other one held him. And neither of them was alone anymore. And that not the raids, not the victory, the enemy driven off. That was the thing they'd actually been fighting for the whole time and hadn't known it until they'd won. Danny Cole didn't go into the program. That was the first thing that changed. And it changed because of Danny himself sitting on that overturned crate with his father's arm around him. And he lifted his head after a long while and wiped his face and said something that stopped Logan cold. "Oh," Danny said. "No, I'm not running." He said it quiet, but there was iron under it. Iron Logan had put there 22 years ago. "I've been running my whole life, Logan. Running from the foster homes, uh, running to the club, running from myself, and then running for Hale. All I ever did. And you ran too. 7 years you ran toward that quiet, and it made you miserable, and you just told me so yourself." He turned and looked at his father. "What the hell are we doing? Making the exact same mistake again? Of us going off to hide in some new town under some new name, doing the exact thing that already didn't work. I'm done running. If Vane's people come for me, let 'em come. I'd rather stand in one place with people who know my name than live forever as a stranger." Me that too, you know. You just forgot it for a while. And Logan Carter sat there and heard his own deepest lesson come back at him out of his son's mouth. Understood that the boy had just out-taught the teacher. Agent Ruiz thought they were both insane. She said so plainly on the phone. She listed every reason Danny needed to disappear, every risk, every man who might still come looking. And Danny listened to all of it and said, "I hear you. I'm staying." And Logan got on the line and said, "He's staying, we both are. But I'll tell you what would help more than any new name in any new town. You make that case against Vane so airtight, public, so completely finished, that there's nothing left of his operation to send anybody. Whole thing down to the studs. Do that, and my son doesn't need to hide, because there won't be anybody left with a reason to look for him." And there was a long pause where we said, "Tired. You know, most witnesses beg me to protect them. You're the first one who ever told me to just win harder instead." And Logan said, "That's because most of your witnesses were alone. This one's got family." And Ruiz won harder. "It took the better part of a year, but she did it. Marcus Vane, the clean man with the lawyers and the shell companies, and the house you needed a helicopter to see, went down in a federal case that made the papers in 3 states. And it went down clean. There are loose ends, no surviving operation, no vengeful lieutenant left holding a grudge and a gun. The thing that had threatened the Silver Ridge didn't just retreat. It ceased to exist. And somewhere in the machinery of that, quietly, in exchange for the testimony that broke the whole thing open, Hill's record got made to disappear. In the other direction, the 4 bad years wiped clean, handed back to him blank, a gift from a federal agent who'd spent 6 years failing, and finally, because of him, hadn't. But all of that came later. There's that first morning in the roar of the roadhouse, none of them knew how it would land. They only knew they'd won the day, and that winning the day is sometimes all you get. That's enough because you string enough one days together and you've got a life. There's left, over the following days, the way a tide goes out. There are long goodbyes in the lot, hard men gripping each other's forearms, promises to ride back through, phone numbers exchanged, that this time nobody swore never to call. When it came time for Reyes to go, the old man came and found Logan out by the pie case one last time, to the grandmother's rolling pin that never did come off the wall. "This is it," Reyes said. "The quiet life. For real this time. For real this time. You gonna make it stick?" Logan looked out at the front room at Walter in his chair, at Megan wiping down tables and humming, at Danny behind the bar already learning where Walter kept things, Iris in the kitchen, who'd somehow just never left. "Already stuck," Logan said. "That's the thing I got wrong the first time. Reyes, I thought the quiet life was a place I had to go to, somewhere far away and empty. Turns out it was never a place. It was these people. I had it the whole time and I didn't know, because I kept everybody at arm's length so I wouldn't get hurt. What I did was make sure the quiet stayed lonely." He shook his head. "Not lonely anymore." "That's the difference. Same bar. Away. Whole different life." Reyes nodded slow. Then the old man did something he'd never done in 30 years. Took off his colors, the vest he'd worn for 4 decades, thing that was more a part of him than his own skin, and he held it out. "There's Reyes I can't, not to wear." Reyes pressed it into Logan's hands. Up. Hang it up somewhere. Right there next to the girl's grandmother's rolling pin. That's what these are, Ghost. Both of them. They're the same thing. They're what somebody left behind that meant we protect our own. Your bar's already got one hanging on the wall. Figured it ought to have two. The old man's voice went rough. But we're the best of us. Not because you were the hardest. Because you were the one who never forgot why we did it. You go be the bartender. You've earned it more than any man I ever knew. And you keep that boy close. You hear me? You keep him close. And the two old men embraced one last time. And then Reyes walked out to his bike and swung on, and at once, and rode down the highway alone, old white-haired king going home. And Logan stood in the door and watched the single headlight shrink and vanish, and did not feel the grief he'd felt the first time he'd left that world. Because he wasn't leaving it this time. It was just riding home. And he was already home. And both of those things could be true at once. Went up on the wall the next day next to the rolling pin. Nobody who came into the Silver Ridge Roadhouse after that ever knew what either of them meant. That was fine. Because the people who needed to know, the seasons turned, the town settled back into itself, changed closer now, tighter, the way people get after they've stood together against something and won. Henderson still ran a tab. Walter's hip healed as much as a 68-year-old hip ever heals, and he took to sitting in his chair more and standing behind the register less, letting the younger ones run it, and there was no shame in it because he'd earned every hour of that chair. Afternoon, about 8 months on, Walter called Logan and Danny and Megan over to the register, a folder in his hands, and his stubborn old face was doing something complicated. Not gonna be around forever, Walter started. There's Megan began. Let me talk, girl. I practiced this. He opened the folder. He built this place with my daddy, and I ran it 50 years, and I always figured it'd die when I did. I got no kids, and the world don't want roadhouses anymore. He looked up, and his eyes were wet, and he didn't bother hiding it. That stubborn old man who'd hidden everything his whole life. A bunch of criminals came to take it, and instead of losing it, I had a family I didn't know I had, so he pushed the folder across the counter. I'm signing it over, not to one of you, to all three of you. Logan, Danny, Megan, equal thirds. You run it together. Megan, his voice cracked. There's a second page. And that empty lot next door I've owned for 30 years and never did a thing with. That's yours, free and clear. You want to build your coffee and pie place, your breakfast all day place, you build it right there, and we'll be neighbors. Your grandmother would have. He couldn't finish it. Megan came around the counter and threw her arms around the old man and sobbed into his shoulder. He held her, this girl, whose grandmother and mother had waitressed in his bar, patted her back with one weathered hand, and over her shoulder he looked at Logan. Hello. And the two old men had a whole conversation without a single word. Old men do. Megan built her place. She called it Brook, just like the notebook said, and it went up on the lot next door. On opening day, the whole town came, and Logan stood in the back and watched a 26-year-old girl cut a ribbon in front of a building with her family's name on it, a dream that a week of terror could have ended forever, standing instead because the calm man behind the bar had decided to stop being alone. His eye across the crowd, and she didn't say anything. She just put her hand over her heart, and Logan put his hand over his, and that was the whole thank you, and it was enough. Danny stayed. He took to the roadhouse the way Logan had, on the same piece, in the same small honest work. And the two of them fell into an easy rhythm behind the bar. Father and son, that neither of them had ever thought they'd get. Tireder than he used to be, Danny. He'd wake some nights, and Logan would find him, sitting in the dark, and they never had to say what it was about. The years he couldn't take back, the things he'd done as Hale's sword, but it got lighter over time. Grief always does, when you don't carry it alone. A day, a year or so in, when Logan realized he hadn't found Danny sitting in the dark in months, understood the boy had finally set it down. And himself. The man who had spent 25 years as the most feared enforcer the club ever produced, they called the Ghost, the man who never lost control, One who protected everyone and let no one close. That man poured coffee now. He fixed chairs. He remembered every customer's story. Bill Henderson run a tab. And when new folks came through, passing on the highway, and saw the quiet, gray-bearded bartender with the towel over his shoulder, exactly what everyone had always thought. Here was an ordinary, calm man who'd lived an ordinary, quiet life. And they were wrong the way everyone had always been wrong. They were also finally right, because Logan Carter had become, at last, the thing he'd spent his whole life fighting to be. Not the hard man, the gentle one. And he'd learned the last hard lesson that Walter had tried to give him. The one it took a war on his own front step to finally teach him that being gentle was never the thing you were before you got strong. It was the thing you got to be. If you were lucky, if you turned around in time, after being strong, had done its work. About that, some evenings, wiping down the same good spot on the bar he'd wiped for years. About the four men who'd walked in that first afternoon, so sure they'd found an easy target, an old bartender who looked harmless. About how they'd been right, that he looked harmless, about everything that mattered, and how the whole story had turned on that one gap between what a man looks like and what he is. They'd seen a calm man and thought calm meant weak. That was the mistake. That was always the mistake Damien made and Hale made, and the world had made about Logan Carter his whole life. The man who wasn't looking for a fight didn't know how to have one. Stillness was the same as softness. They looked at a lifetime of hard-won peace and mistook it for a lack of anything worth fearing. They never understood the truth. The most dangerous person in the room is never the one looking for a fight. It's the one who spent a whole lifetime learning how to stop, one who could end you in a second and a half and chooses every single day not to. It's the man who knows exactly what he's capable of and has decided a purpose to pour coffee instead. Logan Carter had walked away from that world once, believing his past was something he had to erase to be forgiven. He'd spent 7 years hiding from it, ashamed of it. Sure, it was the opposite of the quiet, good life he wanted. 4 strangers and a boy he'd raised, and a dying town that opened its arms to teach him the thing he'd had backwards all along. His past was never the enemy of the man he wanted to be. It was the reason he could protect the people he loved. He was never only an enforcer. He was never only the ghost. Underneath all of it, the whole time, through all 25 years and all 7 years and all of it, he had been one thing and one thing only, and he finally knew it, and he finally let himself be it. He was a protector. Always had been. And now at last, standing behind the bar of a roadhouse that would go on standing long after all of them, there's next to his son, down the road from a girl who'd made her dream come true, that would never again mistake a quiet man for a weak one. Logan Carter had finally found the right reason to have stood up, the right people to have stood up for, and the peace that only ever comes to a man when he stops running from what he is and turns, at long last, to face it. The Silver Ridge Roadhouse is still there, at the edge of that lonely highway, surrounded by mountains and endless wilderness. He is still on. The old cut and the old rolling pin still hang side by side on the wall. The old man behind the counter is still there, too, listening, remembering everyone's story, not because he was too weak to be anything else, but because he was strong enough, finally, to choose it. He was the most dangerous man any of them ever met. He spent the rest of his life making sure they never needed to find out. The years were kind to the Silver Ridge, in the way years are kind to a thing that's finally loved right. There came a winter, 3 years on, that tested them. That year fell like it meant to bury the whole state. The highway closed for 11 days, and the roadhouse became what it had always secretly been, a refuge. Truckers stranded on Route 12 came stumbling and half-frozen, and Logan put them up in the booths, and Doris fed them, and Danny kept the fires going. And for 11 days, that little building at the edge of nowhere held 40 strangers safe against a storm that would have killed every one of them alone. And on the last night, before the plows finally broke through, an old trucker with frost still in his beard looked around at the warm, crowded room and said to Logan, Mister, I've been driving this country 40 years. I've never seen a place take people in like this. What is this place? And Logan, wiping down the same good spot on the bar, thought about all the ways he could answer that. Roadhouse, he said finally. Just a roadhouse. But Walter, from his chair, and Walter said, no. Tell him the truth, Logan. And the old man looked at the trucker with those stubborn wet eyes and said, place that got saved once. And places that get saved, they don't forget it. They spend the rest of their lives passing it on. The trucker didn't understand fully, and that was all right. The people who needed to understand understood. Walter Bennett passed the following spring. It went the way he'd have wanted, in his sleep, in the little room behind the bar he'd lived in for 50 years. And Logan was the one who found him in the morning. Peaceful, one hand resting on the arm of that 40-year-old chair that had tried to kill him twice. And Logan sat down on the floor beside him and held that cold-weathered hand for a long time before he called anyone. He let the day start, and he said the things a son says to a father. Just the two of them one last time. You were wrong about one thing, Logan told him. Always said this place die when you did. It's not going to die. You made sure of that. You gave it to us, and you gave us to each other. And that doesn't die. That's the one thing that doesn't. He gripped the old man's hand. Thank you for never asking. For 7 years, you never asked. You just let a broken man stand behind your bar and become whole. Well, you saved me before I ever saved you. I don't know if you knew that. Hope you knew that. They buried him on the hill behind the roadhouse where you could see the mountains, and the whole town came. So did the brothers. Reyes rode in one last time. Or still, slower still. And he stood at the graveside of a bar owner he'd known for only a handful of days years ago and wept like he'd lost blood, as he had. And afterward in the roadhouse, packed wall to wall, the way it had been, that first terrible, wonderful night, they didn't grieve so much as celebrate a life fully lived, days fully saved, a family fully made, and it was the send-off Walter would have grumbled about and secretly loved. Megan gave the eulogy. She stood up in front of the whole town, now a business owner, a woman fully grown into the girl who'd carried a notebook full of dreams. There it is. And she said, my grandmother worked in this bar. My mother worked in this bar. That was my whole inheritance, a job in a building. Walter taught me it was never the building. It was the people who fill it. He gave me a lot next door and told me to build my dream. And I did, and I named it for my family, but I got it wrong on the sign. I should have put his name on it too, because he was my family. All of these people are my family. And she looked at Logan and at Danny, and her voice broke and held. We were 4 strangers in an old bar. Look at us. Look what we built out of almost losing everything. The roadhouse never closed. Logan and Danny ran it together for many years after that. And Brooks thrived next door, and the 2 buildings became, in time, the heart of a town that refused to die the way small towns were supposed to die. People moved back. Young families, drawn by something they couldn't name, some warmth that radiated off that stretch of Route 12 that other forgotten highways didn't have. And the ones who stayed learned the story eventually in pieces the day the 4 men came. The night the motorcycles filled the lot by a bartender who turned out to be something else. What became the kind of story a town tells itself. The kind that becomes true in the telling, truer than true, and finally just theirs. Danny found a woman, in the end, a school teacher from the next town over who came in for coffee and stayed for a lifetime. And she never once flinched at the years he couldn't take back. Because Logan had taught the boy that the right people love the whole of you, or none of you. Hers. And she loved the whole of him. They had a daughter. Danny named her Grace. And when Logan asked him why, Danny said, because that's what you gave me. When I had my hand on that gun, and you gave me a way to put it down instead. Says Grace, Logan, I didn't earn it. You just gave it. Figured she should be named after the thing that saved her daddy's life. And Logan Carter held that baby girl in his arms. This man who'd once been the most feared enforcer in the country, and he was so gentle, so careful, his big scarred hands cradling a life that existed only because a boy he'd raised had chosen, in one impossible moment, to be the shield instead of the sword. Old behind that bar, truly old in time. His beard went from gray to white. His hands got slower, though they never stopped knowing how to fix a chair. Town got so used to him that the newer folks never even wondered about the past of the kind old man in the roadhouse and remembered everyone's name. They just knew him as Logan, the one you could tell your troubles to, one who'd help you if you were stuck, the calm one. And that was the whole victory, right there, hidden in plain sight. That a man who had spent 25 years being feared got to spend the rest of his life being trusted instead. Us got to become, at long last, just Logan, the most dangerous man any of them ever met, got to lay that danger down, the way down, and pick up a coffee pot, and never once need to be anything else again. On the last good evening of his life, though none of them knew it was the last, the way you never do, Logan stood behind the bar and looked out at the room. Danny was down the end, showing his daughter how to work the old register. Megan had come over from Brooks after her close, the way she did most nights, and she and Danny's wife were laughing about something. Her was going. The coffee was on. The old cut and the old rolling pin hung on the wall, side by side, two relics of two families that had become one. Then felt something settle in his chest that he'd chased his whole life and never once caught until now. Not peace, exactly. Peace was too small a word for it. It was the feeling of a man who has finally completely who he was always meant to be, who ran from it and hid from it and fought it and lost 7 years to being ashamed of it, and who turned around in the end and walked back toward it and found out it had been waiting for him the whole time, patient as an old friend, in a roadhouse at the edge of a lonely highway. Once that, leaving his past behind was the only way to be good. He knew better now. His past wasn't the price of his goodness. It was the shape of it. Every hard year, every violent room, every lesson he ever learned about how to stop a fight, all of it had been leading here. This bar, to these people, to a life spent standing between the ones he loved and the dark. And he was never only an enforcer, he was a protector. Always had been. And he'd finally found the right reason, and the right people, and the right place to be one. Logan Carter looked out at his family, and his family looked back at him, and he picked up the towel and wiped down the same good spot on the bar he'd wiped for a lifetime, and he was at long last and all the way through exactly the man he'd always wanted to be. Dangerous man any of them ever met, and he spent every last day of his life making certain they never needed to find out.